The whole idea of a pitch to me stinks because that to me smells like somebody trying to sell me something. And I just don't agree and don't like the whole nature of the idea of agencies pitching brands. I think to your point, capabilities are capabilities. It's pretty much a fair playing field out there. Every day I read a DigiDay or Ad Age article interviewing some agency that says they now have a proprietary AI whiz bang that somehow slices and dices customer data and makes it more targetable and blah, blah, blah. And I don't, like you, I don't really believe a whole lot of that stuff. It just is meant to create efficiency for the agency so they can be more profitable.
Welcome to Contrary to Popular Opinion, a podcast hosted by Vujade Digital. In each episode, we bring you provocative topics and novel perspectives around leadership, business, and marketing that defy the norms because exponential growth demands unconventional thinking and visionary action. So open your mind and let's get into this week's episode.
Hey everyone, Kelly McGuire with Vujade Digital. Excited to talk about today's topics.
Hello, this is Todd, Kelly's partner in crime and advertising and all things related to that and sports and soccer and all kinds of fun stuff that we do together. I have a really fun topic to talk about today because it's a comment you have made to me many, many times over the years. And I want to sort of dig into it, especially as we as an agency are challenged this year with new business and the RFP process. And it's a tough year. It's the sort of the writing's all over the wall, all over the place with a tough economy, an election year, marketers being asked, every CMO report we read says marketers are being asked to do more with less, which that's not new news. That seems to be every year. But the idea of marketers having to do more with less and needing resources to support them vis-a-vis an ad agency, for example, is the daily life of our business. And so one of the comments you have made to me many, many times over the years, which I always chuckle about, is you've always said that if you were on the brand side, you would be an agency's worst nightmare. And I know you say that having spent the bulk of your career on the agency side, you know everything there is to know about the agency business. And a lot of marketers never end up on the agency side. We do see a lot of people bounce back and forth. They go client side or they go agency side and they kind of go back and forth. And so they have different perspectives. I myself have done that. I've been client side and I've been agency side. So I have the perspective of both. You've been predominantly agency side. So what you see is what the agency sort of world delivers to the brand side. And then what we sort of see optically is that there are people on the brand side who have never lived in our shoes, don't really understand maybe the agency thing as much as they should, which is why I think you said if you were on the brand side, agencies would have a real tough time ever selling to you. And so let's talk about that. We can pick up on just sort of the beginning of that life cycle process, which is the RFP or the agency search consultant. And the idea that somehow agencies and brands have to come together at some point. How do they do that? What's the cost? What's the energy? What's the expense? What are the challenges, the problems, the good things that happen? So let's start with the RFP. Is that really the best way to find an agency? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll clarify that when I make that comment of an agency's worst nightmare, I think it can be expanded out into a bad agency's worst nightmare, because I think I'd be a good agency's best friend because I would understand their side of it and their needs and be able to be a big advocate in a way that I think would be important. But I always say that I assume that I would be going into a scenario that is probably less than ideal, because unfortunately, I would say that that's more the norm than the exception to the rule. I think a lot of it comes down around how do you know what to look for? And when I say the agency's worst nightmare, I would liken this to the idea of the magician who starts to reveal the secrets kind of thing and how they're blackballed from the community kind of thing, right? Knowing the smoke and mirrors and the tricks and the things to look for and the questions to ask and the things that you try and skirt around and hide around, and being able to bring that to the surface would be a pretty significant challenge. Again, just knowing what corners to look around and what things to uncover. And I think that's where it would become a challenge. But I think that's what makes this topic interesting, is kind of bringing some of that to light and understanding those perspectives. So I think, as you said, starting out with the RFP process is really understanding how a relationship between an agency and a brand starts? How do you even know where to begin? Who to open yourself up to? Who do you want to hear from? How do you sort through the thousands and thousands of options that are out there? I mean, obviously, it goes from everything from your own experience and people you've worked with, which is probably the best way to do things for the most part, friends and family and recommendations and advice that you get, to agency search consultants, to open RFPs, to, all kinds of ways. It's pretty hard to sort through a really big sea of options and narrow it down to even start somewhere. And then you go into an RFP process that I think just starts you off on what I would consider a bad foot, because first of all, it's hard to write a really good RFP. I think a lot of them are fairly poor in the starting point. That's a difficult skill in and of itself. But then you're immediately kind of putting yourself into this race where everyone's putting their best foot forward. And we always say this A team and B team. And, you're just setting yourself up to be told everything you want to hear versus necessarily the reality of what an engagement's going to look like. And I think you're too much relying on capabilities. And I think that creates an imbalance of expectation between what is capable or possible versus what you're actually going to experience and get. I think are often very disconnected. And I think it's too easy to fall into the shiny object. I've been told about this great thing or these wonderful things that may not actually come to fruition, but it's what kind of hooks me in. And it almost ends up feeling a little bit bait and switch type situation versus being engaged and finding a way to meaningfully work with someone who's motivated to think about your business and showcase it. For me, the RFP, it's just a hard process. Like, I understand that there's not an immediately better way to point to, but the natural RFP process, it's a strain and a drain on the people pitching to it. We've been obviously on that side of it, and you never really know. It's not a fair playing field. You don't know what information's being passed. You don't know what people are promising, but what they're actually doing on the back end and what you're going up against. And are you bidding against yourself? And are you saying the right things? And one of the hardest things that we come into is we could probably spend 2 straight days going over every possibility and every idea and every big idea if we wanted to, but somehow we have to put our pitch in 60 or 90 minutes and get it all out and hope that we didn't cut the thing that would have ultimately gotten us over the line for the sake of time and having those conversations. And we have the weirdest experience where the best presentations and the best engagements that we get are the ones that start to result in conversation, and that immediately eats the majority of the time, and we don't even get through the presentation that we want to, which is a weird experience to be like, this is going really well, but then it undercut us on the back end because we couldn't get to everything on that front. So all of this is just highlights of the pitfalls that the process creates that makes it, I don't think it's the right way to pick what should be a very critical, very long-term relationship. I would argue, if it's going the right way, should be an absolute linchpin on the success or failure of your business trajectory.
Okay, then I'm just going to ask you point blank. If you were in the CMO role or the brand side, leadership role, and you were tasked with finding a marketing services partner to help you execute, let's just call it the full marketing and advertising sort of plan for the brand, knowing what you know about being on the agency side and knowing how you've experienced how brands have looked for that, can you dumb down the top 5 or 10 things? What would you do if today you worked for brand XYZ, whether it's an emerging brand or a mature brand, or I don't care about the size or whatever. So try not to let budget or anything skew how you would approach this, because it would somehow, but don't let that happen in your answer here. But what would you do? What are the core steps or process or things that you would think through if you were on the brand side to hire an agency? How would you do it?
So I'm going to try and approach this from a idealistic scenario. So I'm going to leave out a lot of variables and things that might change this. And I'm just going to try and think of this on all things being perfect, what I think I would truly try to do. There'd be some adjustment to this. So my first step is I would try to diversify the way that I identify my consideration set. So I would try and maybe lean on my past experience and open up a couple options to that. I would try and get some recommendations. I would maybe do a little bit of my own research to find some names and explore. And I would narrow that down into a reasonable set of people that I wanted to have an initial conversation with. So I would look at 10, 12 people that I wanted to do a 30-minute intro call with or something along those lines. I would then go through the process of having those calls and getting a feel for the principals, the people that really run and set the guidance of that agency and really the direction of what they do, and try and use that to narrow down what I would go into the next phase. I would try and get a sense of who it is, what their motivations are, how they run their business, what's important. And I would try and have a set of criteria that's important to me, like you laid out. What is your customer profile? What is your size? Where would I fit within the portfolio of work that you're doing? Who are your current employees? I would try and think about the things that would narrow it down. And then honestly, this is the part where I don't know that this works for everyone, but again, I'm saying this from my perspective of what I would likely do, is once I got down into a set of people that I felt good about moving forward with, I would try and create a process of aligning with them in a way that I can identify what it would be like to work with them. And to be fair, I would probably carve out some degree of budget to allocate towards the work I'm going to ask them to do on my part, because I would want to go a lot further than the surface. I wouldn't necessarily want the spec work and the oversharing. I would want to give them the time and the energy and the bandwidth to really put something in it, knowing that if they don't get selected, they're not just completely out of it and then I'm one of many and they're scrambling to it. So I would probably have at least a small budget, something reasonable that can allocate for the time and energy I'm going to ask for. And then I would go about trying to create a system that gives them the right information to talk to me the right way. And I'm not necessarily looking for capabilities, proprietary tech, all these things, because I don't really believe in those things. Again, I think all things being equal, someone who is good at marketing can get access to the things they need to get access to work on my business. I want to hear what they think about my business. I want to hear the questions that they ask me and the way that they're exploring whether or not I'm a fit as a client and what they want to know. And then I want to treat it more like an interview and know not what are you pitching me, process or experience or those types of things. I'll look at that. I'll look at case studies. I'll look at your experience a little bit. But I want to hear you think about my business. And I want to hear the people who are going to work on my business think about my business. I want to know, what is the talent roster? Do these people actually work for you yet? Are you going to win my business and then go hire a bunch of people and it's a crapshoot who you end up with and who you end up paying? And more controversially, I want to hear about the long-term plans around the relationship. So I don't want to be promised the world and how you're going to turn things around day one. That's very unlikely. I want to hear the process that you're going to take me through over the next multiple years and how you're going to set up a foundation and learn about my business and grow with me, and how we can work on a compensation package that allows you to do that and win when I win and maybe lose when I lose a little bit, right? How do we tie ourselves together with the right motivation? I've always made this comment, and I work on my own projects, and I think I've said this before. I do not like to go for the lowest bid and the cheapest thing. I inherently think about, if I grind someone down so low, I immediately put myself in a negative position to, if anything goes wrong or anything's not ideal, it's incredibly easy to walk away from me or not give me the extra mile. I would rather have someone feel really good about my business and think, I'm going to do the extra thing. I'm going to go the extra mile because this is a great client of mine. This is a great relationship. They're understanding. They work with me. I want to do the best work. Like, I think that symbiotic relationship exists. And I want to hear that from a partner coming to me that wants that from me, that wants to make promises based on reality, not just promising me the world until I sign on the dotted line and then they'll figure it out after the fact.
Well, that is a pretty common agency reaction, though, because when you think of the big agencies and the big pitches, right? If you're one of the holdco agencies and you're pitching, I don't know, BMW, for example, and it's a $500 million account, chances are you don't have $500 million worth of staff hanging around waiting to do work on that account, right? Like, you have to go higher. So I know in your description here, this would be like the most ideal, perfect scenario. But in those scenarios, it's impossible to have that sort of labor and talent just sitting around waiting for that big account. So they do have to hire based on account.
You can at least have the senior leadership. You can at least have the structure and the thought leaders, the people that'll be motivating and leading the teams that come in and providing them the right structures and making sure that they're vetting the talent that they bring in to bring the right characteristics to the table to fit the vision that was sold.
Yeah, I agree. So it goes back to the comment you made about why isn't the process of a brand finding an agency more like an interview rather than a pitch? Because the whole idea of a pitch to me stinks, because that to me smells like somebody trying to sell me something. And I just don't agree and don't like the whole nature of the idea of agencies pitching brands. I think, to your point, capabilities are capabilities. It's pretty much a fair playing field out there. Every day I read a DigiDay or Ad Age article interviewing some agency that says they now have a proprietary AI whiz bang that somehow slices and dices customer data and makes it more targetable and blah, blah, blah. And I don't, like you, I don't really believe a whole lot of that stuff. It just is meant to create efficiency for the agency so they can be more profitable.
Well, the funny thing is, just to interject there, is these tools, it's not that they're not good, but they're only as good as the people using them. That's the common theme is every time we get in, it's this thing's really, really cool, but you can't have a monkey in there using it and it's going to go out. Like you need someone that can think about it and use it and apply it. So it still comes back to the people, no matter how many ways you slice it in one way or another.
Somehow, somewhere, you just violated something by saying a monkey doing work. So there's probably some HR violation in there. So forgive us for that. You made another comment, which I found interesting. And I have seen this in the creative side of the business when a brand is looking for a true creative or brand development agency where they will pay for the spec work. But largely, the idea of you would set aside a budget, let's say $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, even $25,000 if you're a really big company looking for a big pitch and big agency, money being exchanged. I mean, offering to pay for the time and energy to develop that over time, and then also not expecting all of that content to be delivered in a whopping 90 minutes where you check every box and say everything and cover everything that you're supposed to cover. I don't understand why that isn't more commonplace, why the brands don't understand that in order to get the best of the best, it's worth compensating those teams something, give them a few shekels for their time and energy. And to your point, I don't really know if you're pitching a huge account or even a medium-sized account, I don't see how 90 minutes is enough time to thoroughly get what that team is thinking about your business out of them. I think brands completely fail in that capacity where they should give a half a day or a whole day, where it should be an entire half day or day planning and talking about the business. And here's the things that we've learned and the things that we know and the things that you've shared. And it makes us think this way about your business and how we would grow it. And it should be like an interview, not a pitch. But I guess marketers don't have time for that because they're so busy.
You should be expecting to work with this partner for 5+ years at minimum. You'd think half a day isn't that big of a sacrifice for that level of commitment.
Yeah, but how many marketers stay at a brand this day and age for 5 years? The average tenure of people in the high level marketing roles is 3 years or less typically. So I don't think and that might be the problem. They just don't even, they're like, I'm not going to be here in 3 to 5 years. So what difference does it make to me? They'll have another agency come in.
I do always joke. I think that hurts some of the independent agencies and some of the people that can do the best work. I've made that comment. No one ever got fired for hiring the big shiny agency. Even if they fail, you can still be like, they were no name. How was I supposed to know? But if you take a chance on a smaller no name brand and it doesn't work out, you're putting your neck more on the line. And so it inherently is a self-fulfilling prophecy on that front. But something you just said there is really interesting, right? Is the marketing person maybe not staying in place and making decisions on the short term. I liken this to a sports analogy where you have a head coach that will make short-term decisions to keep their job and their record versus the long-term health of an organization and the problems that creates. Imagine being the owner or the leadership who has team members that are making decisions that impact your company, again, potentially for 10+ years, that aren't using the right criteria for your interest. It becomes like that is a highlight of an inherently pretty bad problem right there in a structure that, again, if I was on the upper side of a brand, I would want to make sure I was eliminating that possibility as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's part of the problem, which I just don't really know if brands and the people of the brand side have the knowledge, the time, the energy, the permission, and the wherewithal to really select an agency and probably what would yield the very, very best outcome, which is probably why there's a lot of turnover in brands and agency relationships.
I just wanted to weigh in there before you go too far on that, because I think one of the problems that gets created in there is, and this is a problem with the RFP, it's a problem with the pitch process, is anyone can say anything. That is the problem, is how do you know what is just being said versus what the reality is? And this is where I get into things like definitely checking references, talking to, testimonials and talking to people that will say things. And it's one thing to read things, but we all know that you can ask someone for a testimonial and it's kind of awkward to say no to that. And so you're going to get something versus someone willing to be a reference and pick up the phone and talk to someone on your behalf. That's a big commitment that I would definitely check on. And I would use that as a major indicator. I would want to talk.
Yeah, nobody's ever going to give a bad reference. We get asked for references all the time. We're not digging up somebody in the past that we know maybe we didn't have a great exit from, or maybe we, lost an account on. We're not throwing those people out there. Well, actually we have, but not typically, right? So you're only going to provide people who are going to say good things about you. So even again,
but you can ask the right questions in that reference. You can say, what was it like working with them? What do you experience? I mean, again, you're going to get it, but there's a part of your onus of reading between the lines and knowing what's a shiny recommendation versus what is telling you something you've heard and the detail in which they can go in and those types of things that you go through.
Would you go so far on the brand side as to do things like look at, say, the agency has some sort of social media presence, right? So maybe they are posting things, or the owners or principals are posting on things like LinkedIn. Or would you go so far as to look at that kind of thing, maybe Glassdoor, to see what employees are saying about the company? I mean, that stuff can be a little bit unfair because obviously most of the stuff on Glassdoor is going to be bad stuff from disgruntled, fired employees or whatever. But would you go so far to try and qualify an agency by looking at more socially driven content that's out there? Almost like you've heard how people interview candidates nowadays, that an HR manager will go look at an individual's Instagram account and see what they're posting and how are they positioning or posing themselves, or are they saying crazy stuff or whatever. Would you do that for an agency?
I would not make my decision and I wouldn't trust it on its surface. I would do the research to help me formulate the right questions to ask. I would take a bullet point that I liked and say, tell me more. Look, you said that you achieved this in this case study. Tell me what went into it. Who actually worked on it? Let me talk to the person that did the work that you touted. Let me hear from them and why it worked and what led to them to make those decisions. Let me talk to the person with that thought leadership and hear, where did that perspective come from? So I would use it as a tool to get to where I need to be. But it's, what is that phrase? Trust but verify. I would definitely use it as a guide to get a feel for an agency, but I wouldn't take it at face value. I would use it I would challenge some of it and hopefully see some substance to back it up. Because this leads me to that other point that I wanted to make before, which is we see all the time the new business structure at agencies is disconnected from the reality of the business. How many new business departments, engines, teams, whatever, are tasked with quotas and things that they have to hit, and they will say and do anything to get their leads, to get the dog. They'll promise the world knowing that they're not the ones whose neck is on the line when it's not fulfilled. All they know is they get their commission check for the 6 months or the year in which that money comes in, and then, oh, we didn't actually fulfill all these wonderful things I promised, but I got mine and I got my quota and I moved on, and there's all these other excuses onto it. And that's a problem too, is again, this goes back to anyone can say anything. And especially when you're working with a specific new business engine versus the actual team that is making promises that they will have to fulfill, it creates even more imbalance and problem.
I wonder how many agencies could actually bring the people to the table that worked on a piece of business that made it into a case study. If that question were actually asked, I bet most agencies probably couldn't say, oh yeah, let me get that team of strategists.
You'd hope there'd be at least one person still around that worked on it if it was a case study. Maybe the whole team, yeah, there's turnover, but that in and of itself, like if you had this case study level client, I'm not going to fault anyone for losing a client that they did a case study. There's a million reasons why you can lose a client. It's not bad work. But if you had an entire team that worked on what should be, in theory, a great piece of business that you did, and as soon as you lost that client, you had to let them go, you probably have a pretty bad company structure in place where talent is not at the forefront of value. So you should have a few people that can speak to the work that you're willing to put out there in the world still around. Or again, that would be a big red flag in and of itself, that you're pitching me talent, but you don't actually run your business based on talent. You run it based on hours and filling gaps and promises.
I hear you. Well, I know you got a hard stop today and a hard out, and you got to get going to go play your favorite game, soccer, tonight. So in that note, and because it's the Olympics, instead of asking you what the last ad you saw was, I'm going to ask you, what was the last Olympic sport you watched?
It was on this morning, and I think it was a replay, but it was the pole vaulting world record guy, the Swedish guy that went through.
That was the last thing I watched too, was the young guy that broke his own world record and set a new world record in the pole vault. That was the last thing I watched in the highlight reel last night.
And then I was told that he comes from literally like a pole vaulting family. Like there's a whole documentary on it. I only heard the cliff notes, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I was super excited for that guy, and also excited to watch Snoop Dogg's clips. All right. Well, look, if there's marketers out there trying to kick around the idea of finding a new agency, maybe some of the stuff we said today will give you some food for thought on how you should think about finding an agency, kind of questions you should ask them, really how you should grill them beyond their capabilities presentation or their proprietary AI, this or that. There's a lot more under the hood that you should probably know about. That's probably more important than whatever shiny bells and whistles they're trying to sell you in their capabilities deck. So we'll end there. Thanks. Good luck in your game tonight, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Contrary to Popular Opinion, where we challenge you to think independently, push the limits, and take uncommon action so you can achieve game-changing results in your business and your life. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.